I thought marrying into money would be the start of my dream life. But that night, under chandeliers and champagne, everything shattered. Rebecca, dressed like royalty, walked up to me and slapped me across the face. In front of everyone. "Gold digger," she hissed. The room fell silent. I stood frozen, humiliated, eyes burning. But what no one knew, not even me, was that a billionaire had been watching from the shadows. And in the next few minutes, he would turn my public shame into the most stunning fall from grace high society had ever seen. 2 years earlier, I was just a girl trying to survive, barely making rent in my shoebox apartment, working 2 shifts a day at Brew and Bean, the only decent cafe in town. My hands smelled like coffee grounds, my shoes had holes, and my dinner was whatever was left in the pastry case. But I had something no money could buy, my pride. And I was about to find out that the world of the rich isn't glitter, it's glass. And someone was about to start throwing stones. That Tuesday morning in September changed everything. I was running on 3 hours of sleep, juggling the morning rush like a caffeinated circus performer when this guy walked in. He wasn't like our usual customers. No suit, no hurried phone calls, no impatient foot tapping, just jeans, a simple gray sweater, and the kindest eyes I'd ever seen. He ordered a black coffee and actually said, "Please," which honestly shocked me more than it should have. Then disaster struck. As I handed him his cup, my exhausted hands betrayed me. Hot coffee went everywhere. His sweater, the counter, my apron. I wanted to disappear into the floor, but instead of yelling or demanding a refund like most people would, he just laughed. Not a mean laugh, but this warm, genuine sound that made my cheeks flush for entirely different reasons. "Well," he said, grabbing napkins to help clean up, "I guess this means I need to come back tomorrow to try again, right?" His name was Ryan, and he kept his word. Every morning at 8:15, he'd walk through that door with a smile that could power the entire coffee machine. We started talking, really talking, not just brief exchanges about coffee, but conversations about books, dreams, and the way morning light hit the mountains just right. I learned he was new to town, something about business, but he never made a big deal about it. Then came the flowers. The first bouquet appeared on a Thursday, just a simple bunch of daisies left on the counter with a note that said, "Thanks for the best coffee in town." I kept those flowers until they wilted, then pressed one in my journal like some lovesick teenager. But when fresh tulips appeared the next week, and then roses the week after, I realized this wasn't just friendly customer appreciation. Our first real date happened by accident, caught in a sudden rainstorm outside the shop after closing. We were laughing, running for cover under the tiny awning when he suddenly stopped, water dripping from his hair as he looked at me like I was something precious. "Lucy," he whispered, and then his lips were on mine, soft, tentative, perfect. The rain pounded around us, but in that moment, nothing else existed. That kiss opened floodgates. Weekend trips to his cabin in the mountains where he'd cook breakfast while I watched the sunrise paint the sky pink and gold. Long walks where our fingers intertwined so naturally it felt like coming home. He'd tell me stories about places he'd traveled, dreams he had, and I'd share my own hopes. Maybe opening my little cafe someday, traveling to Paris, simple things that felt enormous because he listened like they mattered. The wealth reveal came gradually. First, I noticed his car, sleek, expensive, definitely not what you'd expect from someone who hung out in small-town coffee shops. Then his apartment, all modern lines and views that probably cost more than I made in a year. But Ryan never flaunted it. He seemed almost embarrassed by the luxury, preferring our simple moments stargazing from his balcony or dancing barefoot in his kitchen to music only we could hear. Paris happened like a fairy tale. "Pack a bag," he said one Friday, grinning like a schoolboy. "We're going on an adventure." 36 hours later, we were walking along the Seine, sharing croissants and terrible attempts at French pronunciation. On our last night, he took me to the Eiffel Tower. As the lights began to twinkle, he dropped to one knee right there among the tourists and street performers. "Lucy," he said, his voice shaking. "You've made every day feel like magic. Will you marry me?" I said yes before he finished the question, tears streaming down my face as he slipped a simple, perfect ring onto my finger. We danced right there on the plaza, spinning and laughing while strangers cheered around us. In that moment, I thought I understood what happily ever after meant. I had no idea that walking into his world would mean leaving mine behind, or that some fairy tales come with a price I wasn't prepared to pay. The first time I walked into Ryan's family estate for Sunday dinner, I felt like Alice tumbling down the rabbit hole. Everything was bigger, shinier, and more expensive than anything I had ever imagined. Crystal chandeliers that probably cost more than my entire life savings, artwork that belonged in museums, and staff who moved like silent ghosts through rooms the size of airplane hangars. Ryan squeezed my hand as we approached the dining room, whispering, "Just be yourself, they'll love you." But being myself suddenly felt impossible when faced with his mother's perfectly manicured disapproval and his father's polite but distant handshake. The conversation flowed around topics I knew nothing about: charity galas, vacation homes in the Hamptons, people with names like Vanderbilt and Rockefeller, spoken about like old friends. I smiled and nodded, feeling smaller with each passing minute. That's when I met Connor and Rebecca. Connor was Ryan's childhood best friend, full of charm and easy laughter, the kind of person who could make you feel like the most important person in the room. His wife, Rebecca, was stunning, tall and blonde with the kind of effortless elegance that comes from generations of wealth. She had a smile that never quite reached her eyes and a way of asking questions that felt more like interrogations. "So, Lucy," she said over champagne that probably cost more than my monthly rent, "Ryan tells us you're a barista. How quaint. You must have so many interesting stories about the working class." The way she said it made me feel like an exotic animal in a zoo, something to be observed and discussed, but never truly understood. The weeks that followed were a crash course in a world I never knew existed. Ryan hired etiquette coaches, bought me wardrobes full of designer clothes, and patiently taught me which fork to use for what course. He was so gentle about it, never making me feel stupid, always encouraging. During those overwhelming days, he'd surprise me with little gestures that reminded me why I fell in love with him. Wildflowers picked from the estate gardens left on my pillow, quiet dinners on his balcony where we could just be us again. But Rebecca was always there, watching, waiting. She had a talent for making me feel out of place with just a look or a seemingly innocent comment. "Oh, Lucy, you're wearing that necklace again. It's so unique." Or, "Don't worry about not knowing the charity board members, dear. Not everyone can keep track of high society." Her words were poison wrapped in silk, and they found their mark every time. Connor never said anything directly, but his silence spoke volumes. When Rebecca would make her little digs, he'd just sip his wine and change the subject. Ryan tried to defend me, but it created tension between the lifelong friends. I could see the strain in Ryan's eyes, torn between the woman he loved and the social circle he'd grown up in. The country club became my personal torture chamber, luncheons where conversation stopped when I approached, tennis matches where I was always picked last, charity meetings where my suggestions were met with patronizing smiles. I started having panic attacks in bathroom stalls, gripping the marble countertops until my knuckles turned white, wondering what I'd gotten myself into. Ryan sensed my struggles. One particularly difficult week, he surprised me with a weekend getaway to a tiny bed and breakfast in wine country. No designer clothes, no social obligations, just us. We spent Saturday morning in pajamas, feeding each other strawberries and planning our simple wedding. He ran his fingers through my hair as we lay in the garden, promising that once we were married, everything would get easier. "I love you exactly as you are," he whispered, pressing kisses to my forehead. "Don't let them change you, Lucy. Promise me." I promised, but deep down, I was already changing. The confident woman who could handle any coffee shop rush was disappearing, replaced by someone who second-guessed every word, every outfit, every breath. The engagement party was my first real test, held at the country club. It was supposed to be a celebration of our love. Instead, it felt like a performance where I didn't know my lines. Rebecca, radiant in emerald silk, took every opportunity to remind guests of my charming background. She told the story of how Ryan and I met at least 6 times, each telling making it sound more like a charity case than a love story. But Ryan was there, solid and reassuring, introducing me to everyone with genuine pride. When the band started playing, he swept me onto the dance floor, spinning me around like we were back in Paris. For those few minutes, surrounded by his arms and his love, I remembered why none of the rest mattered. We were building something real together, something that transcended social circles and bank accounts. That night, as we planned our wedding, we decided to keep it simple, a small ceremony in the garden with close family and friends, nothing too elaborate. Ryan's family was politely supportive, though I could see his mother's disappointment at not having the society wedding of the century. Rebecca offered to help with planning, which should have been my first warning sign. But love conquers all, right? That's what I kept telling myself as we sent out invitations, as I tried on wedding dresses that cost more than cars, as I practiced walking in heels that felt like stilts. Ryan was my anchor through it all, bringing me coffee in bed on mornings when anxiety felt too heavy, holding me when the pressure of fitting him became overwhelming. Our wedding day was perfect despite everything: simple white roses, fairy lights in the garden, and Ryan's face when he saw me walking down the aisle like I was everything he'd ever dreamed of. We wrote our own vows, promising to love each other through everything life threw at us. If only I'd known what everything would actually mean. The invitation arrived on cream-colored cardstock so thick it felt like armor. The annual Metropolitan Charity Gala. It read in elegant script. An evening of philanthropy and grace. Ryan was excited. This was the social event of the year, the kind of gathering where million-dollar donations were announced over champagne and caviar. For me, it felt like walking into the lion's den dressed as a gazelle. I spent weeks preparing. Personal shoppers, hairstylists, and makeup artists transformed me into someone I barely recognized. The midnight blue gown cost more than most people's cars, but when I looked in the mirror, I had to admit I looked like I belonged in their world. Ryan's eyes lit up when he saw me, pulling me close and whispering, "You're the most beautiful woman in any room." I held on to those words like a lifeline. The ballroom was a fantasy of crystal and gold, with centerpieces that probably cost more than my old apartment's yearly rent. Women glided across marble floors in gowns that seemed to float, while men in perfectly tailored tuxedos discussed business deals worth more than a small country's GDP. I recognized faces from magazine covers, politicians, tech moguls, people whose names were synonymous with power. That's when I first noticed him, Alexander. He stood apart from the crowd, watching everything with the calm intensity of a hawk, tall, silver-haired, with eyes that seemed to see through all the glittering pretense. He was the evening's main sponsor, the mysterious billionaire whose donations kept half the city's charities running. But while everyone else was performing for each other, he seemed genuinely interested in the actual cause, a foundation for underprivileged children. I was talking to one of the catering staff, a young woman who reminded me of myself 2 years ago, when I noticed her struggling with a heavy tray. Without thinking, I stepped in to help, just like I would have at the coffee shop. It was instinct, really, seeing someone who needed help and just helping. When I looked up, Alexander was watching me with something that might have been approval. The evening was going better than I'd expected. Ryan was in his element, charming donors and old friends, his hand never leaving the small of my back. I was starting to relax, even enjoying some of the conversations when Ryan's phone rang. Business emergency, some crisis that needed his immediate attention. He kissed my forehead apologetically. "I'll be back in an hour, I promise. Connor and Rebecca will take care of you." Famous last words. The moment Ryan left, I felt the shift in the room's energy. Rebecca appeared at my side like a predator sensing weakness, her smile sharp as broken glass. She'd been drinking, I could tell, and whatever filter she usually maintained was completely gone. Well, she said loud enough for nearby conversations to pause. "Look who's all alone at the grown-ups table." I tried to laugh it off to diffuse the situation, but Rebecca was just getting started. She began recounting stories about my background, but twisted and made cruel. How I caught Ryan with spilled coffee. How I was lucky to land such a generous man. How some people knew how to play their cards right. Each word was a blade designed to cut deep. Connor stood nearby, saying nothing, just watching like this was entertainment. Other guests began to gather, drawn by the spectacle. I felt like I was back in high school, surrounded by bullies while the popular kids watched and laughed. My carefully applied makeup couldn't hide the flush of humiliation creeping up my neck. The truth is, Rebecca continued, her voice carrying across the suddenly quiet section of the ballroom, everyone here knows exactly what you are. A little gold digger who saw an opportunity and grabbed it with both hands. Did you really think we'd accept you? Did you think wearing expensive dresses would make you one of us? The slap came out of nowhere. The sound echoed through the marble space like a gunshot, and suddenly every conversation in the vicinity died. My cheek burned, tears springing to my eyes. Not from the pain, but from the sheer humiliation of it all. Hundreds of eyes were on me, some shocked, others amused, all of them witnessing my complete destruction. You don't belong here, Rebecca hissed, her perfect facade finally cracking completely. You never did, and you never will. You're nothing but a small-town nobody who got lucky, and deep down, everyone knows it. That's when Connor spoke up, and his words cut deeper than Rebecca's slap ever could. She's not wrong, you know, he said casually, like he was commenting on the weather. We've all been wondering how long this little charade would last. Ryan's a good guy, but he's always had a thing for charity cases. The room was spinning. I could hear whispers starting, phone cameras being raised discreetly. This moment was going to be recorded, shared, dissected by society blogs and gossip columns. The small-town barista who thought she could crash the party, humiliated in front of everyone who mattered. I was frozen, unable to move, unable to speak when I heard footsteps approaching, slow, deliberate, commanding attention. Even in the chaos, Alexander appeared beside me, his presence immediately shifting the entire dynamic of the confrontation. He didn't raise his voice, didn't make a scene, but somehow his quiet authority filled the space. I think you've said quite enough. He offered me his arm, a gesture so simple yet so protective that I almost started crying again. Would you allow me to escort you somewhere more pleasant? Rebecca's face went pale. Connor suddenly found his shoes very interesting. The crowd began to disperse, sensing that the show was over. As Alexander guided me away from the scene, I caught glimpses of faces in the crowd, some sympathetic, others disappointed that the entertainment had ended, but all of them seeing me as something other than human. Outside on the terrace, away from the stares and whispers, Alexander handed me his handkerchief. Are you all right? He asked, and there was genuine concern in his voice, not pity, not amusement, just human kindness from someone who had no reason to care about my problems. I don't know, I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. I thought I could handle their world, but I was wrong. I'm not strong enough for this. Alexander studied me for a long moment, and when he spoke, his words carried a weight I wouldn't understand until much later. Strength isn't about fitting into someone else's world, he said quietly. It's about maintaining your dignity when that world tries to break you. And you, my dear, have more dignity in your little finger than most of these people have in their entire bodies. He paused, looking back toward the ballroom where the party continued as if nothing had happened. Some people need to learn that there are consequences for cruelty, real consequences. There was something in his tone that should have warned me, but I was too devastated to notice. As Ryan's car pulled up, he'd gotten my frantic text. Alexander helped me to the door. This isn't over, he said so quietly, only I could hear. Trust me on that. I didn't know what he meant then. I was too busy trying to hold myself together as Ryan rushed out, full of apologies and fury when he saw my tear-stained face and the red mark on my cheek. But Alexander kept his word. It wasn't over, not by a long shot. The weeks following the gala were the darkest of my marriage. Ryan was furious, not at me, but at himself for leaving me alone, at Connor for his betrayal, at Rebecca for her cruelty. He cut ties with them immediately, but the damage was done. The story had spread through their social circle like wildfire. Suddenly, invitations stopped coming, old friends became distant, and I felt like I was dragging Ryan down with me. I retreated into myself, barely leaving the house, jumping every time the phone rang. Ryan tried everything to lift my spirits: surprise dinners, weekend getaways, even suggesting we move somewhere far away where no one knew us. But I could see the hurt in his eyes. The way he blamed himself for bringing me into a world that had chewed me up and spit me out. Then strange things started happening. It began with a news alert on my phone. Local socialite Rebecca Harrison under investigation for charity fraud. I stared at the headline, sure I was reading it wrong. According to the article, the Metropolitan Children's Foundation was missing nearly $500,000, and Rebecca, who served as treasurer, was the prime suspect. Ryan found me reading the article with my mouth hanging open. How was this possible? I whispered. She's wealthy. Why would she steal from a children's charity? Because people like Rebecca think they're untouchable, Ryan said grimly. They've never faced real consequences for anything. But even he seemed shocked by the speed and thoroughness of the investigation. The dominoes kept falling. Connor's construction company was suddenly facing multiple lawsuits from previous clients, all alleging shoddy work and safety violations. The IRS announced an audit of his business taxes going back 5 years. Building permits were being revoked, contracts canceled, and workers were coming forward with stories of wage theft and unsafe working conditions. I watched it all unfold with a mixture of fascination and horror. These people, who had seemed so untouchable, so powerful, were crumbling before my eyes, and it was all happening so fast, so efficiently, like someone was orchestrating their downfall with surgical precision. That's when I remembered Alexander's words on the terrace. There are consequences for cruelty, real consequences. The pieces clicked into place during a quiet dinner at home. Ryan was scrolling through his phone, shaking his head at the latest developments. It's like someone is systematically destroying everyone who was at that table, he murmured. The Hendersons' art collection turned out to be full of forgeries. The Washingtons are being investigated for tax evasion. Even the mayor's wife is facing questions about her nonprofit's finances. I set down my fork, my appetite gone. Ryan, what do you know about Alexander Mitchell? He looked up, surprised by the question. The billionaire? Well, he's legendary. He actually started with nothing, built a tech empire. Now he's one of the most powerful men in the country. Why? I pressed. What kind of power does someone like that have? Ryan considered this. The kind that can move mountains. He's got connections everywhere. Government, business, law enforcement. They say he never forgets a favor, and he never forgives a slight. He paused, studying my face. Lucy, why are you asking about Alexander Mitchell? I told him about the conversation on the terrace and about the look in Alexander's eyes when he spoke about consequences. Ryan was quiet for a long time, processing what I said. Finally, he reached across the table and took my hand. If he's really behind this, Ryan said slowly, then Rebecca and Connor brought this on themselves. You didn't ask for revenge, Lucy. You didn't even know it was coming. But someone with real power saw how they treated you and decided it was unacceptable. The final blow came 3 weeks later. Rebecca was arrested at another charity event, led away in handcuffs while cameras flashed. The evidence against her was overwhelming, not just the missing money, but a paper trail of other fraudulent activities going back years. Connor's business declared bankruptcy, and he faced criminal charges for multiple violations. But it wasn't just them. Everyone who had stood by and watched my humiliation, everyone who had laughed or whispered or pulled out their phones to record my shame, was facing their own reckoning: tax audits, fraud investigations, business deals falling through, secrets being exposed. It was like watching a house of cards collapse in slow motion. I should have felt vindicated. I should have felt like justice was served. Instead, I felt empty. These people had tried to destroy me, but watching their destruction didn't fill the hole they'd carved in my soul. It just reminded me of how cruel people could be when they thought they were untouchable. Ryan and I were stronger than ever, though. The crisis had stripped away all the superficial aspects of his world, leaving just us and our love for each other. We spent evenings talking about our future, about the family we wanted to build, about the life we could create away from all the toxicity. One evening, as we sat on our balcony watching the sunset, Ryan pulled me close. "I'm sorry," he said for the 100th time. "I'm sorry I brought you into that world. I'm sorry I didn't protect you." I kissed him softly, tasting forgiveness and new beginnings. "You couldn't have known," I whispered. "And anyway, it's over now. We're free." But even as I said it, I wondered if we were really free or if we were just moving from one kind of prison to another. The power that had protected me was the same power that had destroyed my enemies, and power like that always comes with a price. Little did I know, the final chapter of this story was yet to be written. 6 months after the gala disaster, Ryan and I were rebuilding our lives from the ground up. We'd moved to a smaller house in a quieter neighborhood, away from the social scene that had nearly destroyed us. Ryan had restructured his business to focus on ethical investments, and I was working on something I'd never thought possible: my own foundation to help young women from small towns navigate big city opportunities. The idea had come to me during one of our long walks through the local park. I kept thinking about that young catering staff member at the gala, how she'd reminded me of myself, how many other women were out there trying to make it in worlds that seemed designed to exclude them. How many were facing the same challenges I'd faced, but without someone like Ryan to catch them when they fell. Ryan was completely supportive, helping me navigate the legal requirements and offering to provide the initial funding. But I wanted to do this right, to build something sustainable that could help women long after I was gone. That's when the letter arrived. It was delivered by private courier, expensive paper, elegant handwriting. Inside was a check for $5 million and a simple note: "For the foundation. Some fights are worth fighting." I stared at the check until the numbers blurred. $5 million from a man I'd spoken to for maybe 10 minutes total? When I showed Ryan, he whistled low and shook his head. "He's been watching," he said quietly, "watching to see what you do with your second chance." The foundation launch was everything I dreamed of. We held it at a community center in my old neighborhood, not some fancy ballroom. The women who attended were baristas and retail workers, students and single mothers, hungry for opportunities that seemed just out of reach. I shared my story, the real story, not the sanitized version I'd learned to tell at society events. I told them I thought changing myself was the price of admission to a better life. But the only thing worth changing is a world that makes women feel like they have to choose between authenticity and success. The program grew quickly: mentorship, job training, networking events that felt more like family gatherings than business meetings. We partnered with small businesses and ethical companies, creating pathways for women who might otherwise be overlooked. Every success story felt like a small victory against the forces that had tried to break me. Ryan and I renewed our vows on the anniversary of our first date, back at that little coffee shop where it all began. This time, there were no societal expectations, no pressure to impress anyone. Just us, our families, and the people who'd supported us through everything. I wore a simple white dress that cost less than Rebecca's evening purse, and I'd never felt more beautiful. The ceremony was officiated by the pastor from my hometown church, the same man who baptized me when I was 12. Ryan's parents were there, and to my surprise, they seemed genuinely happy for us. His mother even hugged me afterward, whispering, "I'm sorry it took me so long to see who you really are." But the biggest surprise came at the reception. Alexander appeared, looking exactly as composed and mysterious as he had that night at the gala. He approached us during the quiet moment when we were cutting the cake, and I felt that familiar mix of gratitude and weariness. "Congratulations," he said, his voice warm but formal. "I hope you don't mind the intrusion, but I wanted to see how the story ended." Ryan shook his hand, man to man, with a respect I hadn't expected. "Thank you," he said simply, "for everything." Alexander turned to me, and for a moment, his careful composure cracked just slightly. "You know," he said, "I've spent my entire life accumulating power, convincing myself it was for noble purposes. But watching you these past months, seeing what you've built from nothing but compassion and determination, that's real power. That's the kind that actually changes lives. He handed me a small gift box. Inside was a silver locket, simple and elegant. When I opened it, I found a tiny photo of the coffee shop where Ryan and I had met, and on the other side, an engraving. Dignity is the only currency that never loses value. Remember that, he said quietly, when the world tries to convince you otherwise. He left as quietly as he'd arrived, but his message was clear. The protection was still there if I needed it, but he believed I was strong enough to handle whatever came next on my own. And you know what? He was right. Today, 3 years later, our foundation has helped over 200 women find their footing in careers they love. Ryan and I are expecting our first child, a daughter we're going to name Hope. We've built a life based on love, authenticity, and the belief that everyone deserves a chance to succeed without sacrificing who they are. Rebecca was sentenced to 5 years in prison and is required to pay full restitution to the charity she defrauded. Connor lost everything and moved to another state to start over. I don't hate them anymore. I actually feel sorry for them, trapped in a world where worth is measured in dollars and status instead of character and kindness. Sometimes, people ask me if I regret marrying into wealth, if I wish I'd stayed in my small town where life was simpler. But here's the thing, I didn't marry wealth. I married Ryan, a man who loves me exactly as I am, who chose me over his entire social circle when it mattered most. The money is just money. The love is what makes it all worthwhile. The real lesson here? It's not just about revenge or justice, or even standing tall when others try to tear you down, though all of that happened. It's about something deeper. It's about knowing your worth when the world tries to discount it. It's about refusing to shrink for people who can't see your light. It's about finding the ones who do see it, and never letting them go. And sometimes, if fate is kind, it's about someone powerful enough to stand beside you and say, enough. But the greatest victory? It's not in watching those who hurt you fall. It's in turning your pain into purpose. It's in using your story to lift someone else out of their silence. So if you're listening right now, feeling small in a world built to keep you that way, hear this. You don't have to change to be worthy. You only have to stay true to yourself long enough for the right people to find you. And when they do, don't let go.